All right, we're going to get started here. This is the second quarter meeting of the START movement, and this should be a pretty quick meeting here. We're going to just start off with a little bit of an update on the litigation that's going on with respect to the short-term rental ordinance here. And then Brad Herbert was going to float an idea by. We'll take some inputs on that, and then we'll get into the meat of today, which is some options in terms of doing longer term bookings while this ban, the current zoning ban, is effective in Arlington. So bookings longer than 30 days where you can still rent legally in all areas of Arlington in spite of the ordinance. So starting off, I'll just do a really quick review and update on what's happening on the litigation front. As you guys know, there was a suit filed in September of 2019. An injunction hearing was heard in October of 2019, and that injunction was denied later that month by the judge in the 67th District Court in Fort Worth. The plaintiffs in that, they appealed the denial of the injunction, and that appeal was submitted in November, but wasn't actually heard until March. And also in March of this year, the third appeals court down in Austin, or I'm sorry, no, in November of last year, the second appeals court in Austin, they overturned large portions of the Austin short-term rental ordinance as being unconstitutional, which then led the plaintiffs for the short-term rental ordinance here in Arlington to file a motion to reconsider with the district judge in the 67th over in Fort Worth. And that's a motion to reconsider his denial of the injunction in the first place. Hearings were held for both the appeal in the appeals court in Fort Worth in March, as well as the district court. That one was also held in March. And on April 27th, the 67th District Court came back and said he, in answer to the motion to reconsider, he said that he was not changing his mind on that and that he was still denying the injunction, which puts it in the hands of the second appeals court, and they have not yet ruled on this. That ruling could come any day now, but you never really know. It seems like things slowed down a lot when COVID kind of popped on the scene back just a few months ago. So we're still waiting to hear back on that, but that's kind of where the litigation is at this point. So as it stands, still 90% of short-term rentals in Arlington are banned. And in fact, we've gone from several hundred down to just a few dozen short-term rentals that currently exist in Arlington at the moment as a result of the ordinance. As well as there are so far hundreds of people who've been cited, taken to court for nothing other than advertising a short-term rental, which the court is taking as, if you have a listing on Airbnb and it does not explicitly say you may not rent for less than 30 days, they're calling you guilty of advertising a short-term rental in Arlington. They've issued tons of fines for that, and as well as misdemeanor violations, so giving people a criminal record for it. And while doing that, the city has refused to go through the normal process for code enforcement, where they give you a notice of violation first and then come back later to check and see if that violation still exists and then fine you. They've gone straight to the citation with that first visit. And after that first citation, instead of waiting for the court date or giving you additional notice, they've gone back a week later and added a second notice, which was a misdemeanor criminal citation.
Really?
Giving a lot more criminal citations than probably they really even needed to, which to my mind, the way that they're handling this is like there's a vendetta against the short-term rental industry here in Arlington, and they are really looking to make this as painful as possible for all short-term rental owners. I know for a fact that Helen Moise, the District 1 council member, she has been at the court hearings. specifically to make sure that that it was being carried out in a harsh way to, I believe her goal is to dissuade people from doing short-term rentals. Whether her goal is legally or illegally, I mean, she stated before that she really believes that they should all be gone. And the group that formed Citizens, what is it, Citizens Assisting Code Enforcement, they've explicitly stated as well that their goal is to eventually get rid of all short-term rentals in Arlington. So that's kind of where this is going. I think it's unfortunate that the city council and our municipal court system is being used as a tool to handle these personal vendettas and not even using the normal city procedure to do this, but that's kind of where we're at for now. And I don't think anything's going to change until we see changes in the city council, which is one of the reasons why I'm running against Helen Moise in District 1. And I won't speak for Ruby Faye, but she's also running for District 6. And Ruby, if you wanted to say anything about that, you're welcome to take the mic for a minute. Not to put you on the spot there.
Okay, I just want to say that it's time for everybody in Arlington to be represented on city council, and that's not the case now. So I want to be everyone's representative with an ear open and a mind that is committed to change. So I support short-term rentals. I'm asking for your support. Ruby Faye Woolridge for District 6.
Thanks, Ruby. And honestly, that's my view of this as well, that I'm running to, there are a lot of people in Arlington that are just not being heard and represented in the city council right now. My sense is that they are there and they feel like they are the representatives of the city of Arlington, but they are not representative of the city of Arlington. I'm running to actually represent the people in Arlington. They may not all look like me. They may not all have my background of experience, of economic background, but their voices matter too in this, and they need to be heard, as Ruby was saying. That's exactly why I'm running, because a lot of the people who've been on the council in the past seem to want to remake the city in their image, and this city just doesn't, overwhelmingly, it does not look like they did. Economically, just racially, religiously, we are a much more diverse city than our city council has actually reflected over the past few years. And it is time that we actually change that and hear a lot more voices represented. Enough on that. Does anybody have any questions on the litigation stuff before we move on? Going once, twice. All right. Before we get into the meat of today's meeting, which is the longer term rental stuff, I wanted to, let's see. Brad had a suggestion on linens for the short-term rental hosts here, in terms of kind of pooling together linens and maybe doing a bulk linen exchange type program or something like that. Brad, if you wanted to pull that up and throw your idea out there. We're just kind of looking to see who might be interested in participating in this, kind of take the temperature and see if there might be some interest in doing a project like this here in Arlington.
Yeah, excuse me, JJ, kind of just crystallize it there. One thing that I'm realizing over the years of doing the short-term rentals is just keeping a steady supply of sheets and other linens going, and kind of modeling ourselves after what I've seen in hotels. You know, they pretty much use all white, and I think it's there for a reason, because it's easy to bleach, easy to see if there's stains and such. And so I started looking into trying to find a hotel supplier to be able to do a group buy on towels and linens and other such items. And I think one of the buying power might be there, especially if we can get a number of people that want to do the same, to have just plenty there and plenty on reserve. So I wanted to float that out there, and if people are interested in it, they can contact me. I'll probably post it on our Facebook groups as well, and see what type of interest is there for buying.
Yeah, that's great. And if anybody is interested, you can add comments to the window here, or just send us messages independently, or feel free to speak up here as well. And one great thing about this idea is, one of the challenges that I had as a host was when I'd get a cleaner, the cleaners would go through and inevitably they would finish cleaning the house before the laundry was done. And it was always a challenge because they were essentially just hanging around the house without a whole lot to do, just waiting on laundry to dry so they can fold it and put away. I looked into laundry services, and just economically it wasn't feasible to do like a laundry pickup and delivery service. And so something like this might actually be a good answer to how to, how to have the cleaner finish their job and not end up, paying them more as they're just sitting around waiting for laundry to dry. So I like the idea, and I think I would, if I'm ever allowed to do short-term rentals again here, I would certainly be up for joining an effort like that, especially if we can make it economically feasible by doing it en masse. Does anybody else have any feedback on that or inputs?
I am a fan of it. This was something that I'd actually researched in the past because I want to just kind of do it on my own, to be honest with you. So the output of my initial research was that hotels typically use higher quality towels, which essentially means that they're as close to cotton as possible, which is what allows them to be bleached. Typically the lower end stuff that you can buy from Costco and the likes you can't really use bleach on them. So I'm a fan of the idea, and I would totally be interested in that.
My concern would be, again, the quality, like you're saying, the higher quality, because the folks that come to my place are expecting really top quality, the linens, the towels, and so forth. So it just kind of depends on what the quality is. I usually keep 3 or 4 sets so that I can keep them rotating, and if one set gets frayed or whatever, then I can just move them out of the rotation and still be okay. So yeah, I would love to take a look at it as long as they're really top quality.
Hey, JJ, can I ask a question about litigation? Sorry.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So you mentioned that it went to the forward, the appeals court, they denied the overturn or whatever, and we're still waiting to hear back from a second appeals court or something. I'm unfamiliar with the court process, so is this the final level, or are there options to explore within the court system regarding the injunction after this final ruling is heard?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And as it was, I kind of left out kind of the follow-on portion to that. So what happened is we have not been denied anything in appeals court so far. We did have a motion to reconsider in district court, and that was for the judge there to reconsider his decision not to grant the injunction, which was his initial decision. And giving him the second opportunity to reconsider, he still decided that he was not going to grant the injunction. The case for the injunction was heard in the second appeals court, or I'm sorry, the third appeals court in Arlington. They have not yet ruled on that, so we're waiting on that, and that is only for the injunction at this point. So even if we do lose the injunction fight, the case would still go forward. It just means that the city would be allowed to enforce the ordinance, until it's heard in court and a decision is made there. The injunction would force the city to take steps that would prohibit them from enforcing at least certain parts of the ordinance until it is heard in court, and then that final court hearing would then decide the ultimate fate of the ordinance. So that's kind of where we're at. And that final hearing is probably going to be a ways down the road, which is why the appeals court decision on this injunction is really, really important. Because if they don't enjoin this ordinance, we're essentially stuck with this ordinance as law here in Arlington until there's a hearing, which could be and probably will be sometime in 2021. It's going to be a ways down the road.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other questions on that? All right. From there, let's move on to the considerations in doing month-to-month and longer-term rentals instead of short-term rentals. Short-term rentals being defined as less than 30 days, and this would be anything from 31 days to a year or more. And Shock's got some information to present on that. During this, we'll kind of go through it in several sections. And we've got, first of all, the advantages and disadvantages of longer-term rentals, property management, platforms available, and then some of the challenges. So after each of those, or actually even during, if you have questions for Shock or inputs that the rest of us could benefit from, don't hesitate to chime in and help out, because this forum, especially with a smaller group of people as we have, it kind of lends itself to some feedback and a discussion back and forth, which I think could be helpful in giving people ideas on what they can do if they're outside of the current short-term rental zones and they're still looking for how to make some income to pay the mortgage as well as the taxes and insurance on their properties while they figure out what else to do with them. So Shock, I'll turn it over to you there, and all yours.
Thanks, JJ. So for starters, JJ's house as well as mine are both outside of the zone. So in terms of the experience, I currently have gone through, I guess, I'm in my second 30-day rental process. So I've got a little bit of personal experience in this regard, but like JJ was saying, and I like to highlight that this is very collaborative. We've been able to put together some information based on our cumulative experience, but this is by no means the end all be all of things. And so as you take this document, we can mail it out to you or, give you access to it however you like to, as a refresher. So for starters, let me see if I can make sure that we can share this document. And let's see. I'm guessing it's going to be that one.
Oh, very nice.
Well, let's see. You guys can see that screen. I'm just trying to make my control panel work here a little bit. So let me shut it down again and start again, because I think it'll be a little bit easier. Okay, presenter view. Got that, and now we can share. And let's see if this works. Can you guys see my screen right now? It should say month-to-month rental.
Yes.
Awesome. So while you're looking at that, I'm going to kind of pull up my notes a little bit. So in terms of the starting point, we wanted to kind of cover the advantages of long-term rentals. I've owned property in DFW for the last 15, 17 years. So, and I'm sure you folks have too. So there's a lot of value in being able to do long-term rentals. For example, there's the legality of it. I know that this may be a relatively new topic, but it is something that's fairly paramount. As a long-term renter, you have the value of being able to kind of manage things from a remote location, as opposed to being a little bit more hands-on in most short-term rentals. The operational cost of it is actually a little bit lower too, because you don't have things like a constant stream of supplies and cleaning that you have to do for the property. So the expenditure is fairly predictable. From a management standpoint, yes, you could go ahead and pay a company to manage it for you in terms of a short-term rental. And typically those are about 25 to 35% of of your costs. Whereas if you were planning to outsource the short term, or excuse me, the long term management of things to someone else, then it's going to cost you maybe on average about 10-15%, maybe as much as 20%, depending on what sort of work they do. So long-term rentals, I know that as compared to short-term rentals are a little bit different, but I think that they're just as valuable for people who are willing to kind of pivot in that direction. The downside to long-term rentals is essentially the income, which I think is probably one of the most important pieces. Obviously, because you're not getting that constant turnover, you have to give a much greater discount, and so there's a loss of revenue. If you do switch to a long-term rental, if things change, then you're kind of stuck with that particular customer. Like I had one person reach out to me and they wanted to rent the place for 17 months. So that may seem like a blessing, but when you're just essentially just doing it to get by for the moment, that's not going to help you a whole lot, because then you're contractually obligated to someone for a very long time and not necessarily making any sort of decent profits. The other aspect is maintenance. As much as people will tell you that, yeah, they'll reach out to you if there's something broken, a lot of times there's maybe a sense of shame with some people. They think that maybe I shouldn't reach out to this person, or I've reached out to them enough times, or they're just going to blame me for something, so they would rather just turn a blind eye to it. And as kind as the intent may be behind it, it doesn't necessarily help you if there's something that could have been addressed fairly quickly. Like, for example, if they don't know anything about termites, or if they see a little leak in the AC system that eventually causes a whole lot more damage. So the overarching theme is that there's just less control over the property, even in things like being able to mow the grass and making sure that your grass is about the same length as your neighbors, and so on. So just like everything else, I think there are going to be challenging aspects to this, but it's really a good solution. So depending on if you want to manage this yourself, or if you want to outsource it to someone else, if you do choose to manage it yourself, essentially being the property manager and just kind of making sure that your tenants are taking care of the house on a regular basis, maybe doing like a once a month check of the property, making things like the sink and other things are operational, toilets are flushing and such. If you want to do that, you're going to have some tools that are going to help you find the right tenants, and to be able to make sure that you feel comfortable with dealing with these people. A lot of our co-hosts are essentially people who've invested their entire livelihood on this house, and it's really difficult for them to risk any sort of major or catastrophic loss. So in that regard, you're going to have to vet your tenants. There are several companies out there that can do a fairly thorough credit check for you, background check. They can tell you if there are any sort of issues with previous payments with apartments, or maybe something like a mortgage payment. You can see if they've declared bankruptcy and so on. You can also see if they've been convicted of felonies, or something like that. In addition to that, if you're dealing with someone and you're really considering them, it is going to be best to verify their employment to make sure that they can actually pay for the property. Especially if it's something that's a little bit longer, like 3, 4, 5 months and so on. You want to make sure that they have a consistent stream of income to be able to help you with that. So, call employers, verify their employment, verify how long they've been there, make sure that you get references from their previous landlords as well. Whether it's been an apartment or a house, I think people are more than likely willing to speak with you for 2 minutes about someone if they know that your intent is genuine. Typically, the basic protocol for rentals is that you get first month's rent as your initial payment, and then the last month's rent is typically due as well. But then you also require a security deposit. So the security deposits are typically the last month's rent. So depending on however you want to play it, and honestly, this may be a good time to figure out how much money your customers potentially have. So if they balk at the thought of first and last month and then the security deposit, then maybe that's a slight bit of an indication about the stream of income that they may or may not have if you get any sort of weird feelings about it. In terms of being able to create a lease, there are lots of websites like I think LegalZoom.com is one. There are a handful of them that have contracts that you can just buy from them, fill out all the variables, and have the customer sign it. Depending on, I guess, the type of contracts you pick, they can be fairly thorough, especially commercial contracts. But as far as residential contracts, they've got all the basics of how are you going to, who's responsible, who's going to stay in the property, stuff about parking, stuff about, the vast multitude of things that are going to be required in terms of being in a part of a house. I guess if you choose to use a property manager, though, it's going to make sense for you to get some background on them too. Instead of, just like you're vetting your tenants, you're going to have to vet the property manager, because if they're not really keeping a good eye on your property, then you're just as much at risk. So in the same regard, you just want to make sure that you do a background check, or a credentials check on your property managers. Oh, you could even do a background check if you wanted on them, just to make sure they're reputable. But in addition to that, if they have their own agreement that they want that they want to use, make sure that agreement is something that you're okay with. Make sure that if you have any sort of legal resources, have them look at it, or if you look at LegalZoom or someplace like that where they'll just have the blank contract for you, you can kind of compare it to make sure that the contract has teeth on it. That way, it's not gonna be an overly tedious concern for you. Just make sure that you're reviewing their documentation thoroughly. Make sure that you at least go look at some of their other properties that they manage for you, or that they just manage in general, just to make sure that they've got a good, keen sense of what it means to watch out for someone else's property. But ultimately, the theme is, don't be afraid to shop around and investigate, and just know that this is your livelihood. So you can be as picky about it as you like to make sure you're comfortable. In terms of the platforms, there are actually quite a few places. So, Furnish Finder, for example, that unfortunately doesn't do home shares, and Furnished Quarters and Airbnb. You can even do Craigslist. I've actually rented out probably 2-3 homes through Craigslist, and I've had really good experiences. So Craigslist, I think, unfortunately gets an odd rap, but you find a lot of good things there, especially when you're talking about catering to the older crowd, people who don't use things like OfferUp all the time, or 5 Mile, or something like that. But there's also another company that I've actually been looking at. It's called Roomies.com, and they allow for you to be able to just rent out individual rooms, but at the same time you could do all of the rooms together. So you could do the whole house on there. And that's something that I needed to kind of add on to the list. So in terms of, I guess, some of the challenges that you're gonna face, you have to try to figure out what your price point is in the market. It's obvious that you don't want to be too low. You also don't want to be too high, and figuring out what that is a fine balancing act. It's obvious that you can't charge as much as you could for a short-term rental, but not as little as a year-long renter. So figuring out that middle ground, kind of researching the market to see what others are charging is is something that I think will definitely benefit you. Another thing is, what about things like a pet? I constantly get people messaging me about the 70 or 80 pound dog that they have. They say, well, yeah, you have a no pet policy in your house, but would you be willing to make an exception because we're looking for a house in this area? So you have to really figure out, am I willing to kind of bend the rules a little bit to be okay with a pet? And if I am, what is the risk that I have to take? And am I okay with that risk? Is there a separate security deposit for the pet that I should charge? Should I do something like a non-refundable fee that I should charge, if I even allow them in there to begin with? And I find that, just from my own personal experience, that people are willing to do non-refundable pet deposits. So if that becomes an option for you, if you just think, okay, what is the most damage that could be done here within the realm of reason, obviously, and how much of that could this pet deposit address? So me personally, I go in with the assumption that there is going to be a little bit of damage done, and I'm okay with that because I figure if I charge a $500 pet fee and there's $500 repairs, it's chances are it's going to be $200 in equipment and about $300 in labor. So if that's the cost of me getting a 30-day rental until the stuff kind of solves itself, then that's an executive decision that has to be made. And the pet thing is really important because when you're dealing with people who are on a long-term rental, it's obvious that they're not going to be able to pet or leave their pet into kennel. So for short-term, that's not something that we typically have to deal with. In terms of the wear and tear of the place, that's another topic. Typically you get a little bit of time to consistently clean after each guest leaves, but how much time and effort does it take to undo 6 months worth of dirt and grime from a property? If you're constantly vacuuming the floors and the AC system's running in top shape and you're taking care of all the bed covers, but if they've been there a long time, chances are they're not thinking about, hey, let me clean the corners of this of the bedroom or underneath it or anything like that. So there's an accumulation that gets exacerbated, or an accumulation of dirt and grime that gets exacerbated when you're dealing with long-term rentals. In addition to that, the challenge of maintenance and being able to get people to feel comfortable to tell you about things that are broken or things that they did break or will be broken. That's something that you're going to have to kind of work on, and it's a trust and rapport that I think would be really beneficial to kind of come up with your guests. I'll give you an example right now. My guests, they've been at the house for the last 30 days, and I keep on getting alerts today about the automatic door being out of batteries, and they haven't changed it, but they haven't told me about it. So I'm going to go ahead and take care of that myself. Being able to let them know that, hey, if something breaks, even if you broke it, just tell me about it so that I can actually address it, as opposed to just kind of keeping it to the self. But again, that's just one of those challenges. So that's all I had in terms of the information I wanted to convey. Are there any questions, comments, concerns, anything that we can address?
Shak, I had a quick question for you. You were talking about the leases earlier with respect to longer than 30-day rentals. And I guess there are two issues there. First, I guess I have a comment and then a question for you. One is that I know here in Texas, when you rent for longer than 30 days, you can run into problems with people who want to squat on your property and overstay. Whereas if it's less than 30 days, then when that stay is finished, essentially they have to leave. But over 30 days, they can say, no, this is where I live, which means that you have to evict them and go through eviction procedures for that. So if you want to do that, I mean, it's important to understand the eviction process and know when the notifications need to go out and so forth. And also with that, have a lease in place, a legal lease. And as you were talking about that, I believe you're a realtor yourself. And do you know if the Board of Realtors or the Arlington Association of Realtors has a lease that is has been reviewed for Texas laws that they have out there, kind of a generic one, but that applies to Texas law?
So good question, JJ. I have to look at the document a little bit more closely to be able to comment on particular areas. But all of the forms that we use in Texas are customized by the Texas Association of Realtors. So all of them are specific to Texas. Now, it doesn't mean that it may not apply to some other places if they have the same rules, but ultimately these are specific. So, but in terms of how they address potential squatters, I'm not really too sure about that. I'd have to research the document a little bit more to see if there's something specifically outlined for it. As a commercial landlord, I've had to evict people, but commercial is a little bit different. And I think that at the very least, and anyone else that's got knowledge about this, and JJ, I think you and I have talked about this, so I know that you've got a little bit more information on it that you can comment on. As I understand it, when you get to the last 30 days of the lease, it helps to give them a 30-day eviction notice for anyone who's leasing the property from you. And that may seem like a slight bit of hostile act, but it's just kind of an FYI saying that they have to be out by a certain date. And if they're not, then you've essentially taken the first step in the eviction process. Is there anything else that, JJ, you can kind of add clarity to?
No, that's my understanding as well, that if you 30 days prior to the end of that lease agreement, if you issue a notice to vacate at that time, then you've already started the clock on the legal process in the event eviction would become necessary. And it saves you 30 days in which, if somebody decided to overstay and not pay, you'd be losing all your income for that entire month, plus probably a few weeks after that in going through the eviction process. So that helps. But to your point earlier, so you're saying that if you go to Texas Association or the Arlington Board of Realtors, is that what it is?
Well, I go to the National Association of Realtors.
Okay.
But I can once we get done with this, I'll do a little bit of research on where people can find prefabs for it.
Yeah, and especially for like leases, because I know leases vary from state to state. Some states have certain verbiage that's required to be in there. And if there's something that the Arlington Board or the Texas Board, or I think it's Texas Association Arlington Board of Realtors, if one of them has something already put together for leases, that would be tremendously helpful. So for anybody who's looking for it, you might want to check with one of those two organizations and see. I haven't actually checked with them yet, but that might be a good resource for you.
Yeah, and feel free to reach out to me if there's any sort of real estate oriented question. Because I'm a realtor, I can do some of the grunt work for you guys and give you the outputs of my research. So if you're looking for any particular type of lease forms or have questions about it, I don't claim to have all the answers, but I definitely know where to find them.
Yeah, one other quick note on that. If you're going to take in a longer term renter, even though I can do the short term renters here, I've got a gal here that's here for 2 months, but I felt a lot more comfortable because she's here and has a specific thing that she's here for an internship. She's going back to college, so on a particular day, she's got to leave because she's got somewhere else to be. So I feel fairly confident that she's not planning on just staying open-ended. So, maybe having an idea of what their future plans are will also help some with feeling comfortable that they actually are going to leave when they're supposed to leave.
That's a great idea. So kind of investigating and talking with people to figure out what's bringing them to town and I guess the reason for their stay.
Yeah, these are good good presentation there, Shock. Lots of good tips, and I do like the idea of the notice to vacate 30 days ahead of time, so you can be ahead of it if eviction does have to occur. Mm-hmm. And I also wanted to point out, I need to research it further, but with the COVID-19 pandemic, I believe there was like a 90-day moratorium on eviction processes. Last I heard, I don't know when that terminates, but back to your notion of needing to make sure that you vet your potential tenants well, definitely be on the lookout for scammers that know that they can take advantage of such a delay and not being able to start the eviction process. And so when it comes back to asking for like the first month and last month's rent, that can really protect you if someone is trying to pull that scam.
Great commentary. Someone will have to fact check me on this. Last I heard, it was April 24th before you could potentially evict someone. So call me a liar if that's the case, but
yeah, I may have misinformation on that. I just remember hearing that and popped in my head.
Well, so I have a question, but I don't know if anybody would even know the answer to it. Make sure my mic. When you were talking about the really being proactive and giving a notice to vacate 30 days before the end of their lease term, could that not also be written in the rental agreement that just as a reminder or just as a notice to that 30 days before the end of your lease, you will receive a notice to vacate?
So
that way, when they receive the notice, they've already read it before they sign the agreement. So when they receive the notice, it's not a shock.
Okay. So you're saying just let them know that you're going to send them an eviction notice 30 days beforehand, and
right? Yes.
Yeah.
Softens the blow.
Yeah, absolutely.
To soften the blow, just put it into your lease agreement since you got a basic template anyway. I'm just wondering.
I think that's a great idea, honestly, and you can choose to put it on the lease in the comments section, or obviously I think that's best practice just because people are forgetful.
Shock, does it have to say notice to vacate or eviction notice, or how does it have to be worded? Is there any special wording, or does it just have to say, thank you for being here, and you've got 30 more days, and
So I'm no lawyer, and when it comes to evictions, people can be very highly sensitive to the details. There's a specific process on how you evict someone and what information has to be on there and where you can actually post it. Like, for example, you have to post it on the inside of the door, at least from my faint memory. But I would encourage everyone to actually look at the city's website for specific requirements that they have that you have to follow to meet the requirements, before the legal system will consider them communicated to, or I guess given notice of.
Yeah, that's a really good point on that that Marty brings up. Especially each state, a lot of states have specific verbiage that you are required to have in any kind of eviction notices, and I believe Texas does have a specific statement that you have to include in that. I'll look and see if I can find that, and when I do, I'll post that to the START. By the way, kind of an aside here, but related. The START movement, we now have a Facebook page as well as a Twitter and an Instagram account. So if you're on here, go ahead and if you follow the START movement Facebook page, I'll look for that legal verbiage, and if I can find that, I'll post it on that START Facebook page so that everyone can pull it from there. And as to Marty's point as well, that's a great idea, because I've seen this happen firsthand. When people get an eviction notice and they're not expecting it, they have a tendency to freak out, which you don't want. So this kind of goes to, I think Shock pointed this out earlier, that communication with the tenants can be extremely helpful. And just by letting them know ahead of time, hey, 30 days before the end of your stay, you're going to get this notice. You can take this as simply a reminder that your stay ends in that time. And if you want to extend, just let me know and we'll extend. That's no problem. But if you give them that heads up, then they don't have that negative, angry reaction that can cost you a positive review at the end of the stay as well. So I would definitely communicate with the guest before sending out that eviction notice so that they understand the context of why that's going out. Did anybody else have anything for the month-to-month rentals? All right, that's all we had on the agenda for today. If you guys want to stick around, I'll stick around on here as long as you want. I'm happy to talk to anybody or answer any questions that you have. Otherwise, I'll give it one last go. And if anybody has anything to add, you can say it now. Otherwise, we'll consider this meeting adjourned.